Today, we are extremely lucky to be having Alireza Karduni coming to us from Simon Fraser, where he's an assistant professor of human-centered computing at the School of the Interactive Arts and Technology, where he directs the Data and Dialogue Lab. His research sits at the intersection of infoviz, social psychology, and AI, with a focus on how interactive systems shape belief formation, persuasion, and critical thinking. He studies how people interpret data in politically and socially charged context and designs visual and conversational tools that support reflective engagement rather than reactive polarization. His work has been published in all of the leading HCI and Viz venues. He collaborates with researchers and designers and stuff in the public interest organizations, develop responsible approaches to information design in the era of misinformation and AI generated content. Alireza, I turn the stream over to you. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say.
Cool. Thank you for having me. Yeah, I'm here to talk about some of the stuff that Ash just said. Essentially, a lot of my focus have been shifted toward this idea of how might we foster dialogue. And I'm coming right now with being in the past 2 months with a lot of news from my home country. So if I look and sound a bit distracted, that's the reason. But the other part is that this topic is extremely relevant to my own sort of life right now. The idea of how I just want to introduce myself a little bit. I was a planner, urban planner, so I was not doing HCI at all. When I moved to the United States, I worked in the city of Chicago as a city planner, but then I shifted discipline and started building visual analytics tools for city planning and stuff, wrote a book around like ideas of social media and cities. But then as we moved forward, as I lived in the US, I started developing this extreme interest on the notions of misinformation and news and how we process information. So my sort of initial hammer to address this problem was to use visual analytics, machine learning to create these interfaces for people who deal with misinformation, to be able to understand sources of news and whatnot. But then as I move forward, I realized that actually what's really fascinates me and is important is how these tools that we have, visualizations that we have, shape the way we believe things, the way we understand, shapes our identities, because these informations are all around. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is 2 research projects that I've done in the past few years around these ideas: persuasion, belief formation, identity, and what role visualization plays in those. But let me give you a little background of like where I'm coming at with this. A couple of months ago, there was this series of protests in Iran that ended up really in a bloodshed by the government, by Iranian, the Islamic Republic. Sort of they killed, for a couple of weeks, internet was fully shut down. And the numbers are between 20,000 to 40,000 people killed. It's massive, and it's a state violence. It's extreme state violence, and everyone was distressed. And then as a member of the diaspora, the only thing we could do was to go on the streets. This is a picture I took from Vancouver, where you see people showed up, actually huge numbers, 35,000 in Vancouver, about 250,000 in Toronto, in LA, around the same crazy numbers. One thing I want to point you to is this flag. I just want to get you to feel how, and you probably have similar experiences in the United States. This flag is a flag that's not used for Iran right now. This is from the previous generation. It's called the Lion and Sun flag. So this act of raising this flag in a protest is meaningful for people. People interpret it as a behavior. And a lot of people have a negative attitude towards this flag. But a lot of people have a positive attitude towards the flag. They see it as a contrast to the Islamic Republic. And then the people have a negative because this is a flag that's associated with the previous monarch, and they might be anti-monarchist. But some people say, oh, this is the flag of Iran from ancient times. People come at this behavior from different angles. And then the people who have this attitude are sometimes called dirty leftists or regime supporters. And the other side, these people are some people who are pro this are called fascists. The labels you might have heard in the United States, if you have supported Trump for any reason, you might have been called a fascist, or if you have supported some Democrat, you might have been called an Antifa or some label. So you've been associated with groups that might not have been related to what you actually believe. And now this is my life. I think last week the US started attacking Iran. Now we are at a stage where you and I'm a permanent resident of the US, so I have sit in between of US interests, and I pay taxes, and Iran interests, right? I have skin in both games. But let's think about it, right? US and Israel are attacking Iran. People are obviously killed. However, the bloodthirsty dictator of Iran was also killed. During this, a lot of my friends and I celebrated because this guy, Khamenei, was the source of our misery for years. I grew up in this regime. I was happy as hell. I partied. I did so much drinking that I'm hungover in a week. So it's just crazy. A lot of forces that are terrorists were killed, right? But also, as an American, you might think, oh, US is spending money on this. You know, why is the US involved? Will the current regime fall? Is this even useful? What's going to happen to Iran? Is this moral? Will American soldiers die? Is it even worth it? These questions are a culmination of all the things that come in when we process information. A lot of times when we talk about visualizations, or any sort of information that we consume, we really don't consider that all of these interpretations are shaped by all sorts of information, by morality, by attitudes, by beliefs. So this is what we're going to talk about. So the idea that it's complicated, and then I don't really think Viz is that relevant. To take the Viz side it's my job. I have to do Viz, but honestly, the lessons are more important than the Viz part. Right now, I'm at this stage, man, to hell with Viz. I just need to think about the broader pictures, but also I'm a Viz researcher. So there you go. So 2 studies. One is more recent. We just presented at last year's Viz. It's about sectarian misperception at Viz. And then the other is on persuasion with visualization. By the way, how much time I got, Andrew? You're muted. I just want to make sure that.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. You can take as much time as you want.
Okay.
To the whole hour.
Okay.
As you wish.
All right, cool. So yeah, let's look at these 2 studies. So the first one, the idea is that showing people their misperceptions about the out party can reduce extreme views. So this is a replicated study in social psychology. We introduced the notions of uncertainty visualization in this. So the idea is that it can sometimes hurt or help. Assume that this is me. I'm bald. My name is Alireza, right? This is still me. I'm not only bald. I might consider myself a lefty radical Antifa, for example. I might wear the blue hat, right? What happened? And all the other lefty Antifas, the people who I view having the same views, are my in party. Now, jokes aside, assume that this is the Democratic Party or something, right? Now, all the people who are more conservative than me are my out party. So this is how in social psychology, we define group dynamics, right? In party or in group and out group, right? So if you ask me what proportion of right-wingers, the out party, support political violence, I probably overestimate. And this is something that happens. Your view of the people who are not within your group are more extreme than what they are. This is the phenomena that people perceive views of other groups to be more extreme and less diverse than they usually are. This is called false polarization. In the US, the word polarization worked because of the bipolar dynamics of the politics, but a better term is also sectarianism, because groups sometimes are not just polar. There's a bunch of groups that compete with each other. So can we correct these misperceptions? So if you're a Democrat and there's a Republican, if you ask a Democrat to predict the out party views, essentially asking them what proportion of Republicans support political violence, for example, and then you show them the actual level of support, And for example, you tell them you predicted that 80% of Republicans support political violence, but the number is actually 40%. This is just an example. So there is like a 40% gap between your views and other people. This is called correcting the misperception. So you first elicit their beliefs and then you show them the actual data. This obviously can happen for the Democrat towards the Republicans as well, right? So recent studies, over the time has shown that this reduces the perception gap about the other party. So the perception gap reduces, but more interestingly, it has the potential to reduce respondents' own expressed extremism. If people have been through this process of being corrected, the people who have had this show a smaller degree of extreme beliefs. But correction effects have limitations. Some studies show to fail this effect for many different reasons. For example, there's competing information, there's motivated reasoning. In the face of uncertainty, sometimes these don't work, right? And then these correction effects can be easily undermined, for example, by a caveat that there is uncertainty in the data. The other thing is that these focus exclusively on the average or most common view of the out party, essentially meaning that focus on the central tendency, right? And this might obscure other important details. It might contradict with personal experiences with more extreme views, and it might lead to mistrust. And the other important details are, what is the distribution? Are there outliers? How spread is this, okay? So in this study, we're trying to address this problem a little bit. How does communicating uncertainty, variability in out-party views using data visualizations impact the correction effect of partisan misperceptions? So we asked people to predict out-party views, showed them visualizations comparing their views with actual responses, and then we asked them how much they support those views. Okay, so the study design was, we have this mean-only condition where we just showed the mean of the out party compared to their actual response. And then for the control condition, we only showed them their own response. So we repeated that, oh, you said the out party, the average support for political violence is 50%, for example. We had a condition where there was this confidence interval that showed 75% of responses within this region. And then we have this mean plus points that showed actual Republican or out party views. Okay, so we had this mean plus point, mean interval. And then these conditions, there was this between subject study, 120 participants per condition. They first predicted the level of out party support for 10 different items, where that included support for political violence, SPV, or support for undemocratic practices, SUP. And then they were divided between these visualization conditions, and then they reported their own level of support for all 10 actions. And then after this study was done, we had a post-test, which was about data and visualization perceptions, some recall tasks, and we had this qualitative section, which people reflected. We showed them their own responses, and they reflected. They wrote for us why they made those judgments. So they reflected on their own responses, given they've now been corrected. So the hypothesis that we had was based on Drucker's study that SPV and SUP will be lower for mean only compared to control, right? So if you show people the correction, the difference, the gap, people's own responses will be lower. We also predicted that in the mean only condition, compared to the uncertainty conditions, people will still show a lower support because uncertainty essentially might undermine the gravity of this difference, right? So the idea is that if uncertainty is present, it might actually undermine the corrective effect. So we had these two conditions that showed the uncertainty. So this is just sort of a plot of people's result. The misperceptions actually existed. Obviously, there was like a lot of variations, but across all items, there was this gap between the actual and people's predictions, replicating previous studies. And then we see that, for example, compared to the control condition, the mean only condition showed lower support for both political violence and undemocratic processes. Similar to mean plus interval and similar to mean plus points. So compared to control, all conditions that showed the correction data led to lower support for these. Interestingly, the mean plus point condition led to, and we're going to have a discussion on this, showed lower support compared to control, the mean only, and the mean plus interval condition. So this condition, where you showed the actual sort of out party values, showed a stronger effect of correcting misperceptions. And let's think about it. Let's think about why. So the idea is that mean plus point, even though we supposed it would do the best, it's not doing the best. So why? So essentially, correction conditions less likely to show support for political violence and undemocratic processes. And mean plus points and mean only show a larger effect. Mean plus interval, the one with the band, not as much. Another thing that we see is that people in the mean plus interval condition are just showing a higher error rate in remembering the averages, essentially estimating the proportion of support. Now, here's why. First of all, we want to speculate why we think that the sort of uncertainty range might be behaving like this. Our sort of suggestion is that people might just view as this range as another heuristic, where if you fall under that uncertainty, if your prediction is there, it's a good enough condition. You don't really pay attention to the differences. It might serve that purpose. Alex Kale has a study on satisfaction, like I can share with the paper. I don't remember the name right now, but it's done some work in this. So it's related to that work, what we find. So let's look at the qualitative results. It's more complete in the paper, but it's interesting. So after going through the study conditions, participants retrospectively reflected on their own responses. We read a total of 464 comments and thematically analyzed them. So what we find is that most participants observed and recognized their own misperceptions. For example, a Democrat participant said, "I was far off how the Republicans think. Really glad to see this." So there was this really interesting feeling of support. But we observed 83 comments that showed improved attitudes towards the out party. So they wrote, for example, a Republican said, "I seem to have opposite guesses in relation to the average Democratic response." That is pretty eye-opening and also makes me think a little bit more. So this happened under the mean plus points condition. And it happened for a Republican. We observed a lot of comments that showed a lack of receptivity towards attitude change, often due to a mismatch with personal experience. So this is the idea when I said there are like competing information, right? So for example, my responses are far higher than the ones from polled Republicans. However, I do not find the polled information accurate. It does not represent the actions and experiences I have had in my real life. So this person is coming in and negating what they've seen, putting it in contrast to their own personal experiences, essentially not trusting what's happening. Some people did reflect on their own biases. I can see how the current political climate and all the outrageous things I read every day about the current administration is influencing my opinion of Republicans. See, these persons already are recognizing that sort of media might influence their beliefs. They're recognizing a source of their biases, and that might help with the correction effect. Some people showed heightened emotions. In all instances referenced above, of anything that supports a Democrat's warped view of social progress, I chose 100% because as someone who has been politically aware since high school, the patterns are just so evident. This person have a really strong and set view of the Democratic Party, right? So attitude certainty is really important in how you process this. So what does it all mean, right? We look at all these conditions, right? The control condition, we don't see it. So this person comes in with the same effect. Showing the correction might have a short-term, we didn't test a long-term effect, but other studies might have a short-term effect. People might reflect. Uncertainty might not help, at least the way we presented it, because people might say, oh, I fall within this region, so I've been right. So the gap is less pronounced. And for this data set, we think that this min plus point, because there's like this sort of mass around zero of no support for both parties, that seeing that is really might be really effective, might be more effective than seeing the mean response, right? That might be something that can help with in cases where the uncertainty, the details of the uncertainty supports the gap, it might help. So when people are, and the other thing is that when people are enraged, we think attitude change is more difficult, right? Participants who were more hopeful showed more receptivity. Again, these are qualitative results. It's just a point of like reflection, right? Correction effects were relatively small, but similar magnitude with previous studies. In my opinion, any correction effect is good because there's just way too many political partisan violence going on. And we didn't really try to persuade people. We just showed them the data. This sort of false polarization effect is impactful when it linked with personal elaboration. And that's something we're going to get to in the second study. And the political climate matters. Right now, I've been cursed at by my friends who I was super close with till 3 months ago on just what happens in Iran. People are so angry and so frustrated that a lot of these efforts that I've been studying this, I have some strategies planned, I have my cute little ideas, but sometimes they don't work. And the other knowledge impacts participants' judgment. How can we augment visualization to better reflect these personal individual experiences? So this is the first study. Before I get to the second one, I'm happy to take questions, clarify, because we're going to move to a sort of a similar but second study. Any questions for the first study? I can't hear.
Just 1 second.
Hi. So I just wanted to ask, can you hear me? Yeah. So if you could go up a couple slides for the four visualizations. Yeah, that one. So it seemed like one of your hypotheses for why the mean interval had less of a correction effect than the mean plus points is that if a person's guess falls within the interval, then they just say, it's good enough. So they're not as receptive to their change.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, another possibility that the mean plus points seems a bit more concrete because you can actually see the full distribution. So I was wondering, is it possible, have you considered using mean plus points as well as perhaps showing the quartiles? Because that way you would be showing the full data and also still allowing for people to say, oh, maybe I am or am not within a reasonable range.
No, we didn't consider that. That's an interesting point. We're running a follow-up study on this, and I'll actually reflect it to my team right now because we're trying to test whether with just a mean plus interval, what is happening. And that's a really good point to bring up. Thank you for that suggestion. To combine these ideas, it really, my hunch is that there are more salient visual elements and there are less salient visual elements, the way you interpret things. My hunch is that whenever I think the points probably outweigh the uncertainty when you see them, but let's see. It's a design problem as well. Really interesting question. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions while we're in this little lacuna? Saw some head shakes, so I think it means that we're just excited to hear you go on.
Yeah, cool. All right, so now I'm going to talk about we focused on misperceptions, how visualizations, but in general, just information might impact it. I had some good news, a lot of bad news. In general, it's how we live, it's our life these days. But this study I like to present because it's my worldview on how we need to think about these sorts of problems. The idea is that people update beliefs about visualizations, but their attitudes really are not that changeable. It's not that easy to change. So let's make our wording a bit more concrete. So a belief is a person's agreement with the truth of a claim, which can be represented as a proposition about the relationship between entities or variables. For example, I think vaccination rates and mortality rates are positively correlated. That is a belief, okay? It's a concrete thing that you can evaluate. It might be formed by a data visualization, right? It might be formed by an evidence, okay? We might show them something about vaccination rates and death per capita, and then that might form the belief, right? But these beliefs are not necessarily formed in a silo, right? They're formed under social context. For example, you might come into the evidence with an attitude. You might be already anti-vaccines, okay? So this notion of attitude is your overall evaluation of entities or issues in a positive or negative light, okay? So you might be more critical of the evidence, or you might be less likely to update your belief if you have pro or against vaccines idea. And this can happen with a lot of different things. Now, how are attitudes shaped? That is even more complicated, right? Social identity, which we just discussed, right? Group dynamics is a very strong influencer of attitudes. So if you're a Republican, and if you're a strong Republican, strongly viewed Republican, you might disregard a lot of things that contradict your social identity. But there's ideology, there's values, there's whether it's relevant to you. There's a lot of context that shapes. There's a whole field of literature on this. There's also certainty. So how uncertain you are on your attitude influence this dynamic. So when we think about how we process information, historically, we focus on our eyes and perception, but the way you interpret it and make that into knowledge often is very socially constructed. Okay? But how do we study this as a visualization researcher? So we want to first measure this belief change. This notion of belief change is interesting for us because if we are able to change beliefs, we have persuaded some people into change something, right? So a person might have a prior belief, and then you show them visualization as evidence, and then they will have a posterior belief. Okay? So how we measure that, we designed this tool. So we're focusing on correlations now, right? This beliefs might be in terms of a correlation, for example, between vaccination rate and death per capita. But assume that we're talking about labor union participation and corporate profits, right? When we ask you, hey, what do you think is the association or correlation between these two variables? You have some thoughts. So if you can draw it for us and tell us your uncertainty around it, then we can model it, and then we can show you evidence, ask you to interact with the visualizations, and then we can measure your posterior belief, right? This way, we have a measurement of your belief change, right? About the specific data. I'm saying measurement because it's accuracy. We've done some comparisons, but who knows? People's mental constructs are different. But we have a measurement, a good enough measurement to measure belief change, right? But we also have a prior attitudes, right? We come in with attitudes. For example, to what extent do you support or oppose a COVID-19 vaccination? You might have pre and post attitude, right? So we can measure that as well. So we can say, what is your attitude prior to interaction with the evidence, and what is your attitude afterwards? So in the literature, the idea is that visual representations of uncertainty can draw attention and lead to overrepresentation of lower probability outcomes. And then when true correlation conflicts with prior views, participants may focus on lower probability relations than are closer to their prior belief. Okay, so given these two, we ran a study on these correlations, right, with 3 visualization conditions, similar to the other one. We were really interested in uncertainty representation. We had a line condition that showed the correlation to people, the best fit line for correlation between vaccination and death rate. We had an ensemble condition where we showed a band, a sort of a bunch of lines that looked like a band. And we had a hypothetical outcome plot, which is an animated visualization where each frame is a sample from the most likely outcomes, right? So it just jumps around. So you can read the Hobbs paper. It's really interesting by Hallman et al. Okay, so we measured existing attitudes towards 2 topics: COVID-19 vaccinations and labor union membership. Then we measured change in belief about empirical relationships when presented with real-world data about each topic. So we showed them a bunch of different empirical relationships. And then we compared visualizations with and without uncertainty representation. So the question we asked is, do existing attitudes affect how people update their beliefs about correlations? Okay, so we show you a correlation data. We ask, if you're already anti-vaccine, does that reduce your amount of belief change? We also ask, do uncertainty representations lead to less belief change when data conflicts with existing views? And then we also ask, do attitudes change after interacting with data? Okay, 3 questions. So let's learn how to read this chart. So this chart shows on the x-axis, we look at distance from prior belief to true correlation, to the correlation that was shown. This is about belief change. And then here, 0 means small belief change, and top means large belief change. Okay, so this line is people closer to this line, people who update beliefs to align with the visualization. It's like a full belief change. Whatever you saw, right, you just jumped to the visualization. People with neutral attitudes change beliefs to match the sample correlation showed by the data. So people who are like, I don't care about vaccine that much. I see that, all right, makes sense. It matched. If they were really close, it's fine. If they were really far, they just matched the visualization they saw. Now, what's really interesting is that people with strong attitudes who were positive or negative, they showed a smaller belief change. What this means is that if I had like a strong investment or like attitude towards vaccines or union memberships, I am less likely to change beliefs when prior belief differed more from the sample correlation, right? So if I'm already far, my change is smaller. Okay, so the first question, smaller changes in beliefs among participants with strong topic-specific attitudes. Okay, now do uncertainty representations lead to less belief change? Let's look at it. So this is, again, comparing no uncertainty representation. It looks like, but there's an overlap. So there's like the difference between attitudes, right? Strong attitudes and neutral attitudes for the line condition is negligible. It's not strong. But for both uncertainty conditions, that idea that the effect of attitudes on belief change was larger for visualizations with uncertainty representations. So I think we can now say that there was a larger effect of attitudes on belief change. What that means is that if the uncertainty representation exists, it gives you an out, a stronger out of not agreeing with what you saw, or shifting your focus on the existence of uncertainty. And in general, attitudes really rarely change, right? It's sticky, there are changes, but it's noisy. So in general, majority of attitudes, that it's very small. So the change in attitudes was very small. We don't have any evidence for changes in attitudes before and after. And that's like generally in social psychology, attitudes are the stickiest thing and it's hard to work through. So you might be able to change beliefs about specific empirical relationships, but you really need to work hard. And you probably have the same experience in life, right? You need to, if you're sitting at your Thanksgiving dinner and you have changes in belief, You have to attack from all these different angles and without getting people agitated to be able to do things. Okay? So our findings add to the recent evidence of top-down influence of prior views on how people evaluate scatter plots visualizations. This top-down means your sort of prior belief and your attitudes influence how you interpret these. So the takeaway from this is that to understand the persuasive power of data visualizations, we need to consider both beliefs about these specific empirical relationships that we're thinking about. Let's say you're a journalist and you want to present something. You need to design around this understanding that people come in with different prior beliefs. And you need to consider the broader attitudes that people have about this topic. And then when data contradicts existing views, uncertainty representations may draw attention and undermine the persuasive power. Now, this becomes an ethical question, right? Do you show it because that's the sort of that uncertainty exists? Or are you wanting to be more persuasive and you want to just show people what you want to make some changes? You just like how it happened with COVID, right? They really, with COVID vaccines, just undermined. They did not really discuss uncertainty much. And it backfired with a certain population because some people said, oh, they lied. They used that sort of masking of uncertainty as a nefarious behavior. And the other thing is that like interactions and how you explore is something that I'm interested in, especially now that people ask questions directly from AI to confirm things. It's an interesting problem to look at. Like, how do people search? What are the role of sort of explorations, interactions? Do people only find evidence, look for evidence that supports their views? Or no, people might look for contradicting evidence. That's an important question. So these are the two studies. I was not honestly in the mood for a formal sort of discussion around these topics. We've been running these studies, like there's 5 or 6 papers that we have around these themes. It's my research area. What I want to say is that, first of all, I think this is important in a sense that not uncertainty visualizations, but in general, considering how you approach presenting information in the political and social context is really important. I think that's one part of it. As a presenter, as a designer of visualizations, you should consider. The other thing that it keeps giving me, running these studies, it gives me some humility in terms of understanding that the people who are very extremely different from my views in my life or in America or anywhere, they might come in from a bunch of different ways towards what they believe and how they process information. So I've seen a lot of hubris, a lot of talking down. There's discussions around like from the Democrats towards Trump supporters, from Trump supporters towards Democrats, right? There's just these back and forth that ignores how these dynamics work, right? And it comes from all sorts of life. So I think as one thing that I really hope to achieve with this talk is that if you end up doing something or going into the public domain or helping some politician, you can approach your designs considering the very complex dynamic of how attitudes, beliefs, and identities are formed. Especially identities are something that I really care about these days because I'm stuck with it, right? I am not in the middle of a war, but my life is affected by a war and a government that is very brutal, but also United States that attacks like sometimes, and Israel indiscriminately, sometimes they kill civilians, and we've had that. So it's hard for me to process information right now. As a person who researches this, it's hard for me to remain calm and not hate some people who say things that, like, let me give you a final personal reflection and then we can discuss. right now, a lot of us Iranians are, you might, if you have Iranian friends, you might see a lot of hatred towards Western leftists, right? Extreme hatred. Why? Because suddenly in this world where there is a foreign power helping, killing a dictator, they're like, and because there was no mention, like there was less coverage of what was happening to Iran before the war, they're like, oh, so you're now anti-war and you care about people who are dying and stuff. You say, oh, American attacks, kills. There's this dynamic that's happening. There's like this negative attitude towards, and it trickles down. So it's just crazy how to observe as a person who was anti-war. Now I'm sitting on, oh, am I anti-war? Do I want the US to bomb my own country? My sister just called me. She was afraid, right? But also the supreme leader was killed. It's so conflicting. And so humility is important, and supporting your friends and family and giving them space to have hatred and emotions is important, because the world is volatile and people's opinions are based on their own interests. So you might see or hear from Iranians who just are hating on the leftists, and if you're a right-wing person in the United States, you might really like it. But I don't know, it's a complex problem. It's been really hurting me, honestly. But anyways, I just shared, it was a moment of therapy for myself to share it with some Western audiences as well. Happy to talk about this, just see what y'all think. Let's discuss. Or if you have any questions, I'm happy to respond. It's so odd to see the hands clap, but I can't hear it. Feels like people are not clapping.
What's the sound of silent hands clapping?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry. There was some room noise and we wanted to make sure that it wasn't getting onto the recording. Wow, what a talk. Like that's really an incredible amount of things. It's just it's a cool stream of work and it's a lot to take in at this sort of moment in time. I'm happy to let anyone if you have any questions, happy to. Lind, it looks like you open video. Do you have a question?
No, yeah, yes, I guess I do. Hey, this was a great talk. I really appreciate it. And it's very timely. I think a lot of us are considering these complex issues right now. It's not like we haven't been here before. So my wife and I were just reflecting on like how many wars have we witnessed since we were born?
Yeah.
We were of a certain age. We were born at the end of the Korean War. And you can't, it's hard to even remember them all. So
Yeah.
somehow it's like a sort of a sad commentary. But I was wondering about your different research projects. Where did you get your subjects from?
It's from Online Prolific. So these are randomly picked respondents from the United States. I believe the second study included Canadians. The first study was only from the United States.
You know, one thing I've become sensitive to working in the area that I usually work in, which is healthcare, and also education, is the extent to which a lot of the way we're thinking about things is kind of weird in the sense of Western educated industrial, what that acronym is. And I've been thinking about that both in terms of how we frame these problems, but also even the way we think about critical thinking. And I wonder in some ways whether in some cultures, it's not just attitudes that may be different, but actually are how we should even be understanding how they come about. The other thing that certainly this is like a really knotty problem. I remember the work by Hallman and Gelman trying to get people to be calibrated to various visual displays of uncertainty, and they eventually gave up.
Yeah.
After a while, they couldn't come up with something that actually allowed people to be well calibrated to uncertainty or variations. I recall that stuff. It also strikes me that was one of the original research interests of Kahneman and Tversky.
Yeah.
There was a paper like in the 70s in Science, I think it was, a famous paper, and they found that even experts in making quantitative judgments really had great difficulty with scatter plots, right? Which to this day we all like, but we're maybe not the best instrument for kind of communicating, especially to people who maybe aren't used to looking at data.
Yeah.
Right? So anyway, that's just a side comment, but I really appreciate your talk.
Yeah.
I'll have to follow up and see the other things that you're working on.
Would love to. Yeah, I was talking to Andrew about it. Absolutely. You hit the nail on the head pretty much, because it is probably the toughest area of research if you care about dealing with dialogue and people's understanding. Because honestly, and I started with the fact that I don't think visualization mattered that much. And I don't think that's like, I think the visualization is a very tiny important, like design matters, right? But you could design better, but honestly, framing and rhetoric, I think visualization designers should really study those just to be able to communicate things better.
Sure. Yeah, we are very visual creatures, of course. So anyway, thanks a lot.
Thank
Really
you so much. Yeah.
taking the time.
Any questions from the room?
If I can just ask one thing, for the second experiment that was conducted, it seems like you measured prior attitude, prior belief, then showed some kind of data, then measured posterior belief and posterior attitude.
Yeah.
It's just one thing that I was slightly concerned about measuring posterior belief is that the visualization you're using to measure belief and the visualization you're showing to showcase the data are exactly the same, which at least to me would indicate that people would be biased towards saying, okay, we've seen the true correlation. There's not too much more that it biases you towards choosing the sort of expected correct belief, whereas the attitude didn't really show a lot of change. I don't know. I apologize if I'm not phrasing this well, but I'm just wondering if there was maybe some sort of different way to measure belief than having them just replicate the visualization that they were just shown.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are other ways that are time consuming to measure beliefs. Let me first start. That's a really good question, especially since if it's a repeated measure study, for example, and I'm trying to raise another even concern, they might be used to knowing that they're going to see something. So there's going to all sorts of problems. What we found is that using the same visual encoding and same sort of visual metaphor to measure beliefs in this context helps with the way people articulate them. So we have a study on this, on how measuring pre and post beliefs. It just helps. It just becomes like a quicker way of getting people to represent their sort of mental constructs. But you're right in a sense that because it's using the same metaphor, people might be so inclined to just replicate what they see, especially for posterior beliefs. I'm doing a lot of work in elicitation in general, especially elicitation of beliefs. So it's the problem that we face usually is a problem of expressiveness versus accuracy. And I think you're concerned with accuracy too, in a sense of like, how much are you capturing an actual posterior belief as opposed to just a person who's replicating? And I think the answer is that I don't know. I think this is the best way I know to elicit pre and post beliefs. That's better than using a slider, because I've done sliders or any sort of written thing or assuming people's belief changes. But to go back to your question on whether there are other methods, one of the interesting methods that we compared to is called Markov chain Monte Carlo with people. Look up that paper, and it's a sort of a longer sampling based, so you compare always between two samples from a distribution, and your choice is to find what is closer to your belief, and through repetition you get closer to what you think is the truth. So you act as the sort of chain director or whatever. That's an interesting method. It just takes time. So in our paper, we compared it to that. Shows enough. It's good. This method is good at showing differences between a person's beliefs. But I rambled a little bit because I honestly don't know either. It's hard. Elicitation is a difficult problem.
So what was
I'm working on it. What's that?
What was the paper's name again?
Look up Markov chain Monte Carlo with people, MCMCP.
Thank you.
Yeah. And then I have a paper, a Bayesian cognition approach, that does that study. So you can look at that. It's a 2020 paper with, yeah.
I have a question. A lot of big buzzword in business right now is like personalization, like particularly in light of the AI explosion, et cetera. Like, how do you think we do visualization ethically, particularly in light of these sort of notions of belief and like extremism and so on that kind of come with some of these different design forms? Like, how do we approach this kind of question, like the notion of personalization, in a way that is not going to cause issues or violence or any of the things that can be the outcome of this sort of thing?
Oh, that's a really good question. It's something that I'm like right now studying. There is a paper. That's a really good question. And let me try to articulate because it needs a 2-hour discussion. And first of all, I don't know the answer, but here's where I'm at with it. There's a paper called Durably Reducing Conspiracy Beliefs with AI. It's published in Science 2024 by like MIT researchers who it's so funny. And this is curse of my life. When I was researching misinformation, that team was doing misinformation research. And now I'm doing sort of persuasion AI work. They started doing that. I was like, are you guys like, what is this? Give me some space to do some research because they have money and they hella publish every month. So I can't even keep up. But my beef with that work, and I'm writing a paper with my students on it, is the notion of personalization. It's just a weird question of what is personalization, first of all. Now, the way they design personalization is that an AI model can actually do what I'm suggesting. It can focus on giving you counterfactuals based on what you believe, right? As opposed to just giving a blanket evidence, it can target your existence. That's what they call personalization. And in that regards, I find it intriguing as a tool because yes, it might be helpful, but it's also, I'm not willing to let an agent that's a black box, that's already has biased data, already is problematic, to reduce people's beliefs about whatever, Jeffrey Epstein, right? Like one of the conspiracy ideas in that paper is Jeffrey Epstein. I'm like, is that a conspiracy belief anymore? So your level of truth around that. So like a lot of problems exist with this type of work. And I think it trickles down to visualization. It's a problem. What do we personalize against? What source of truth, right? But also it's democratizing in a sense that people are fact checking on their own. So there's another paper on Grok because people go to ask Grok now, hey, is this factual or not? They find it as a source of truth on Twitter. There might be, I don't know, AI systems are sycophants. They are designed to please you. So now if it ends up giving you more supportive information of your beliefs, what should we do around that? So we do have an AI model design problem, and then we have an AI interface design problem, which I think that's what you're talking about. What I do think we might be able to have some ethical ways of designing around that model. Again, I'm not touching, it's problematic, propaganda, OpenAI stuff. Let's put that aside. On the design front, yeah, I think we could get interfaces to behave in a better way and not be personalized in a sense that, let's talk about critical thinking, for example. Foster critical thinking. We might just use a prompt to say, hey, ask more questions instead of just giving the answer. I think that's the ethical way of doing things, as opposed to personalizing by just targeting what they believe. And then there's a problem of factuality. So it's a really good point. I rambled on because it's in my head right now. So let's come back, let's talk and see what maybe we can collaborate on it. Because honestly, that's exactly what I'm doing right now.
I would hardly call that a rainbow. Like this is clearly like I think it's a pressing topic, and it's great to hear that someone like as smart and focused as this work represents is doing this sick.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're right at the hour. Unless anyone has any burning questions that they really want to ask publicly, and I think we will just thank you again for this absolutely lovely talk.
For sure. Feel free to give me an email and I'm happy to respond. Thank you.
Thanks again. This was absolutely great.
All right.
Bye now.
Bye.